I would call it a fast experience with gastrostomy. Any other questions? Yes?
Actually, I have a list, so don't go anywhere. But I'm going to start with one of the things that I thought I heard you just say right at the tail end. Something about you can't feed them overnight with the machine.
With the pump, you have to be very careful because the pump continues whether the tube becomes dislodged or not. So,
but isn't that really just a cause of making a mess versus a danger?
if the tube comes out, yes, but if it goes into the peritoneal cavity, for example, it's that out of the stomach, but not out of the skin. Or if it starts to reflux up the esophagus. So we usually use gravity feeding so that if it becomes obstructed, it doesn't.
That's with the gastroscopy as opposed to the JG.
Jejunal tube, you have to use a pump. But you're going past the stomach, there's no risk of it accumulating in the stomach.
Just to move on to a couple of the other points. Since you're bringing up nutrition, how, I know this conversation comes up almost on a yearly basis from one in the trauma, so I'll bring it up anyways. Do you have any perception of the need of food supplements?
Well, I have canned talk I give on that. Basically, when parents ask about that, I evaluate whether it's going to be harmful or not. If it's not going to be harmful, I'd say, if you feel comfortable doing it, then go ahead. But there is no evidence that food supplements make a difference. That's all. The thing is, I think it's important that you establish a relationship with a partnership with parents, and that you don't dictate. I think my role is more to describe the benefits and potential harms of the change. And so if you're going to add echinacea to the diet, for example, then my role is to say, well, this is the potential harm of using echinacea. There is no evidence that it makes any difference, but if you feel that it might make a difference, and it does no harm, then I take a relatively permissive role in the position on that.
One of them, monopolizing, but we'll pass. One of the things that I wanted to bring up just for general discussion here too is the evolution of the lack of swallowing abilities. It goes away. You may start off, and new families here have to be aware of a lot of the evolution of how this process goes related to feeding. It's really easy, or pretty easy, at least for most of us, to think that if our kids aren't eating enough food to go to this, I was pronouncing it gastrostomy
G2.
process. Yeah, G2. And it's really good to think that you can supplement what you can get through their mouth by going into the stomach. But it changes such that eventually you have to basically realize you're only going to be giving your kid food through this feeding tube eventually. Because generally it'll last that long.
Thank you for bringing that up. Actually, if you abandon oral feeding completely, particularly in very young children, they will lose interest in feeding by mouth. So generally speaking, if a child is able to take anything by mouth safely, I encourage them to do so, because it helps to preserve the swallowing reflex. As Mark, I think you use the term, if you don't use it, you lose it. Well, it's the same with swallowing. And I've actually seen children with other conditions who, for one reason or another, were not on any oral feedings, and long after they didn't need a G-tube because of their underlying disease, they were still reliant on it because they had lost the swallowing reflex.
Well, so in this particular disease, you don't get it back. We're not going to move through this. And it's a progression, so that's why I'm just trying to emphasize that it is something that you'll start off with as a minor supplement to what they eat. But, you know, we've had it for 5 years, and it's the only thing that gets anything in Michelle's system for probably the last at least 2 years completely, if not 3 years. Which leads me to just one other comment and not really a question. I'm kind of biased towards letting Niemann-Pick kids eat whatever they want to. It's not absolute, and it's not something that they should live off of nothing but Big Macs, which my daughter would have been perfectly happy with for quite some time. But I really would like to emphasize from at least one parent's perspective that they only get to eat for a certain length of their process here. And it's really not, it's a choice every family gets to make, but my view is it's not really worth trying to restrict them because of what you think they should be having, unless it's the only thing, of course, and then that's got its own set of problems.
Yeah, again, thank you. I think that I agree 100% with you, but what I tried to do is alert you to what impact texture has on the ability to swallow. So, for example, you can overcome some of the difficulty with swallowing by breaking something up into small portions and taking time. But you mentioned a Big Mac. I think the Big Mac combines two components of food that are particularly difficult to swallow: bread and meat. And that's fine. But be prepared to cut it up into little pieces, give the child time to move the piece from the front to the back of the mouth and so on. But in principle, I agree with you. There's no magic. And I guess by emphasizing that the diet is, the rules of diet are no different from what they are for other people, is a way of saying, yes, let them participate in the choice.
Promise this is my last one. Michelle is completely and only using G-Tubes. So her primary food is it's called Boost as a name brand. Boost Plus in particular to get enough calories. My question is, do you think that there's a benefit or reason for us to be adding any other food sources such as pureed foods, and with what frequency?
No, this is where I think you need the help of a nutritionist to examine what your child's requirements are and determine whether what she's doing meets her requirements. I should point out that again, the two most important elements are, something I should have mentioned is that the G-tube, one of the other advantages is that it's a very reliable way of delivering medication. And so when a child refuses to eat because they have a fever or cold or something, there's a time when they may be most vulnerable to seizure, for example. Seizure medicine we can give by G-tube. You have a question?
Yes, I have two actually, now that you just mentioned one. My daughter gets feeding sometimes through the tube. I just don't know how much can you actually put through the G-tube at a time? Like when you're giving them formula or something, or water. So I always feel like I'm going to give her too much, or or she's going to be full.
That's a good question. I think that if you take because it actually depends on composition